comprehensive sex education. Now it says comprehensive sexuality education programs seek to change society by changing sexual and gender norms and teaching youth to advocate for their sexual rights. Most CSE programs promote acceptance of diverse sexual identities and orientations and have an almost obsessive focus on sexual pleasure, instructing children and youth at the earliest ages on how to obtain sexual pleasure in a variety of ways. By this petition, I ask you to stop any further efforts to teach comprehensive sexual education to our children, failure to which we will withdraw our children from schools. Please save our children. Now, here to join us and to discuss this a bit further is psychologist Silas Kiriinya, as well as education expert Amos Kaburu. Many thanks for taking time to speak with us regarding this topic. Of course, it's a very controversial one. I'd like to just start off with taking a look at this petition. Do parents have a point, Silas?
Yes, parents have a point. First of all, you know, it's very necessary to get to understand what is really comprehensive. Because some of us, we tend to think it's just sexual education or sexuality education, which is very necessary because sexuality is part of human beings, and it has been there since creation. And therefore, we need to know ways to manage our sexuality. But now, when we talk of comprehensive sexuality education, is a method of instruction which is supposed to focus not only on the knowledge about sexuality, but is also focusing on rights concerning sexuality and defining quite a number of issues, particularly like defining a marriage or defining families or bringing in some gender kind of ideas that probably may not be in the minds of children. Of course, if you look, for example, the recent document that has been produced by UN FPA, which basically is supposed to be the international guideline for teaching this sexual education. If you look at this document, you come to realize that the document itself looks very appealing, and it looks like it has a sense of common good in it, and it has very good information that really can be useful. But if you are very careful and you reflect on exactly what it is that is the agenda of UN, you come to realize that there are key things that they want to creep into the minds of children, and particularly like the issues of gayism, lesbianism. Those are the issues that they want to bring in, and also at the same time, they want to bring in ideas like masturbation and all that. Of course, their argument is that it is age appropriate, but actually if you look at it carefully, you will come to realize that it is not age appropriate. For example, they have categorized 4 phases of age gaps that they are going to train this kind of information. And what they are saying is that they have categorized into 4. And the first one is where they are focusing on 5 to 8 years. That's the first level. Then 9 to 12 years, the second level. 12 to 15 years, and then 15 to 18 years. Now, when you focus on because they have 2 parts, the second part, which particularly is focusing on human sexuality, if you look at what they are calling key concept 5, it is teaching about human sexual behavior itself, and there are ideas they're introducing to our children, particularly 5 to 8 years. And this is how they bring it very well, and it looks very appealing from the beginning, but then towards the end, when they are concluding their argument, you come to realize the kind of idea they want to put. For example, this is what they say, that it is normal for children to explore their bodies. And then secondly, they say, it is normal for children to explore their bodies and even to touch some part of their bodies, which probably can be pleasurable. And then they say, when you touch your body and you feel that good feeling, and you rub your genitals and you feel good, they define it as masturbation. Then they say, the fourth point, they say that some people masturbate, others do not. And they are actually talking to 5 to 8 years old. And then after that, they say that masturbating is not bad. And therefore, all that you're supposed to do is not to masturbate in public.
All right, Amos, I'd just like to throw out this question to you. Let's take a look at the current status of sex education because, of course, it is a reality. We're seeing young Kenyans debut in sexual activity at a very young age. We're seeing an increase in sexually transmitted diseases as well as teenage pregnancies. So, of course, we cannot deny that there is a certain need for sex education. Are there some certain gaps that we're seeing right now in terms of what are being taught in schools? And does this sort of give a rationale in terms of having this comprehensive sex education?
Thanks, Maya. Definitely the answer is that we have serious gaps in terms of what we are giving to our children and giving them the right information which is appropriate at their level that will help them to make informed decisions. But definitely the answer is that a comprehensive sex education as defined by the UN is not the way to go. So we admit that we have a gap which perhaps we need to look at a way how to address it. And perhaps we'll even still call it comprehensive sex education, only that we have to operationalize it. We have to define it in our own way. What is it that will work? Because actually what schools are facing, it's not just the challenge at the school, it's a complete breakdown in terms of what the society will do. And in fact, in our own definition of comprehensive sex education will mean what we were discussing with the Daktari over here, that we have to break the borders. How do we define it? Should we make it a national conversation? Because really the statistics that are coming out are really shocking. You go to our schools, children contracting STIs, the rate has just gone high. When you look at the highest number of new infections for HIV/AIDS, they're actually touching on teenagers and what are young mothers between 15 to 24-year-olds. Last year we were talking about infections of close to 39,000. And in fact, Kenya is rated as one of the 6 countries where there is highest infection of teenage HIV infections. Other countries like Tanzania, Mozambique, Nigeria, and the only country outside Africa is actually India alone. So we're talking about real issues that are affecting us. You're talking about schools where children are being molested. If you look at the case of a school in Mount Elgon where a teacher molested and ended up impregnating 27 children, you need to look at issues that build assertiveness among its children. So these are real issues that we're really battling with. And if you make these a national conversation as part of the way forward, I think that there are greatest opportunities that we could explore in terms of realizing what you are calling comprehensive sexual education. And if actually even you walk through this city, you will find what some initiatives by certain churches, what they are doing. You go to Mavuno Church, you go to Nairobi Chapel, you go to AGC, you go to CITAM. They are trying to find solutions to some of these things through programs such as rites of passage, whereby teenagers are being prepared. And there's a more conversation around parents. They are signed up for a 1-year program. And the parents are also signed up for a 1-year program. So you could see the relationship between the different stakeholders, because you cannot assume the parents in the whole of this conversation. They are the greatest stakeholder, because for as long as you are below 18 years old, then you are a responsibility of your parent and the state. So we have got a responsibility as parents and as a state to protect our children, to give them what is the rightful information. Much as we do not have to insist on what we consider to be absolute perversion from our own values and norms. So we have a gap, but CSEs as defined by the UN is not definitely the answer to the problems that we face.
Now that then brings out the question of what approach we need to take, and of course we'll be discussing this and more right after a break. I just need to take it real quick to a commercial break. We still have more on this discussion after the break, so don't go away. Welcome back. This is K24 Weekend Edition with me, Maya Hayakawa. Now we're still having that discussion on sex education, what would be the correct approach to take when it comes to teaching our children about sex. And joining me in studio is Silas Kiriinya, who's a psychologist, as well as Amos Kaburu, education expert. Many thanks for joining us once again, gentlemen. Now, I'd like to throw out this question to you, Silas, because parents find it very uncomfortable to have a conversation about sex with children. They don't know, when the appropriate age is, and we know that children from a very young age, one of the most common questions that they ask is, where do babies come from? So this is a question that we get a lot from parents. What's the right approach that we can take? How can we teach children about sex responsibly, and how do we determine when the right time and place to bring it up?
Okay, I think just as I said before, sexual education it has to be age appropriate, and therefore parents need to find ways of knowing really what is the age that the concepts of sex probably will begin to come in the minds of children. And in this case, I'm looking at sex as and gender, for example, because when a child is like 2 years old, maybe to 3 years old, they begin to notice that they are different. Girls and boys are different. So when they begin to notice those differences, then you need to really be very close to them. And for example, they will ask these questions, then as a parent, you need to answer them honestly, in a way that will understand according to their developmental stage, and also according to the development of their language. So you have to be very simple and very clear to them. For example, a child may come and ask you, you are the mom, and ask you, so mom, we were taught in school that there is something called penis, so where is yours? So you need to really talk to them clearly and explain to them, for example, I am a woman and this is what I have. We don't have a penis, this is what we have. So you need to really talk to them in a language that they understand. Now, secondly, you need to, as a parent, to inject every opportunity. For example, if you take them to a zoo and you notice that animals are mating, then that's an opportunity that you can grab. For example, if they ask you a question regarding that, then you need to really answer and relate it to human beings so that they get to understand exactly what it is that is happening. Then, but basically what you're looking for is really creating a rapport with your children so that even when we grow older and they experience challenges on issues of sexuality, they are free to come and talk to you. But when you wait for them until they are teenagers, and that's the time we want to talk about their sexual experiences or sexuality or what they are going through, the changes in their lives, then it might be very difficult for you, uncomfortable for you, and also uncomfortable for them to share that to you as a parent.
Amos, from where you sit, where should we go? What approach should we take? Because clearly abstinence education is not working, and of course does have some certain gaps, so that's what some people say. But also on the other side, we have comprehensive sex education, which many people say is just too much information for the adolescents. So how do we strike a balance, and at what point should we introduce sex education for our children?
Thanks, Maya. One of the most successful approaches is to introduce a sector-wide approach, which is a multi-sectoral approach in terms of how we address these issues. And you have to look at you clearly have to analyze the population you're talking about. And research has established that the reason why Kenyans are having problems with parenting is because equally they were poorly parented. So if your parents never told you anything about sexuality, mine never told me anything about it. I think the closest I was asked was by my brother, why do you want to get married? And I think I didn't even just have an answer to that. So when my daughter, who is just 4 years old, asked me the other day, where do children come from? I was equally battling with that question. So we have to look at a society that has been cultured in a particular way, that has been socialized in a particular way.
How did you answer that question, by the way, when your daughter asked you that? What did you say?
I had to try, and at first it was a conversation of God gives us children, and we've been having this conversation until we are almost there, explaining how children come about. So I can say that I've not totally had to explain it fully, so we've been taking advantage. As he said, I came across a goat that was equally expecting, and we used it also to define how God puts kids in their mother's wombs, and after a certain time. So at her own level, she's able to appreciate it, because we are coming from the point of children about in the shop and all those kind of things, which are complete wrong information, so as we move towards what is correct. But as I was saying, it's important to observe that the Kenyan population is largely conservative. But even as it's largely conservative, there are greatest opportunities. For instance, Kenyans are highly religious. They are not so godly, but Kenyans are highly religious. They believe a lot in the religious institutions. Kenyans believe a lot in the media. So when we have got great opportunities such as what you're doing right now, to begin to dispel some of these fears, create information, awareness, education to our parents, use platforms in the church, use platforms in the mosques for us to have this conversation. As I said, can we afford to make this one a national conversation that takes place within the schools, that takes place within the church, that takes place on the street, so that it's not just a responsibility left to the schools alone. We give the school as what will develop for us the curriculum, but the conversation should be made to be national, so that everybody is talking about it, and that way we are able to remove all forms of what is wrong. As I've given examples, there are many churches in this city which are trying to do one or two things, so we could exploit some of these opportunities so that we empower parents to have information and other stakeholders for us to give to our children the right information.
All right, thank you. Well, I'm told that unfortunately time is up. This is a topic that we can spend the whole night speaking about. I'm really glad that we had this conversation, though, as much as it is one that's very controversial. There are very many different views. There are, of course, cultural factors that also come into play, as well as religious beliefs. But it definitely is a reality that we cannot deny, and hopefully we'll be able to find a middle ground on how we can take that approach. Well, we're taking a short break, but I'll still be back with sports. Don't go away.